Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast and our series, Archaeology Meets Missiology, the mission of God in the records of time. Today we have Michael, our resident ephesiologist, and I'm Andrew Johnson in Houston, Texas. Today we have the true honor to be joined by Dr. Titus Kennedy. Titus is a field archaeologist, working primarily with sites and materials of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean world. He's been involved in archaeological projects at 18 sites spanning 6 countries, including directing and supervising multiple projects from the Bronze Age through the Byzantine period. He is an adjunct professor all over at so many different institutions, and he is the editor of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society Bulletin. And when he's not doing that, he's a consultant, a writer, and a guide for history and archaeology documentaries and curricula. Titus, thank you so much for joining us on the Ephesiology Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Good to be talking with you, Michael and Andrew, and looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, we are too. Yeah, we're as you know, we're in this series on archaeology and looking especially at the intersection of archaeology and missiology, which is my discipline. And it's great to have somebody who has the experience that you have in the field to be able to speak into some of the issues that I know we're both concerned about in terms of the intersection of archaeology and scripture.
Well, Titus, so that we can get to know you, just who you are and who's God making you to be. What are maybe some? Let's go with 3. What are 3 things that your friends might know about you that would help us get to know you beyond the academia?
Well, probably the first thing is they know that I love traveling. I'm gone quite a bit. These days it's mostly for work, but I enjoy traveling just for fun as well and exploring. Also, lots of outdoors activities like hiking and kayaking, running, sports, things like that. So like to get outside and do things. And the third thing would probably be that I enjoy watching movies.
Okay.
All right.
What type of film are you taking in? What is your enjoyment level?
I like all different types and periods. I would say that I'm probably more partial to much older movies. I enjoy new movies as well, but I do watch a lot from the silent era and all the way up to today. So I think there's some hidden gems out there that people don't even know about because they're 50 to 80, 90 years old.
My goodness. Okay, so then you're probably not gonna, like me asking you if you're gonna pick a Wes Anderson film or a Coen Brothers film. You're just gonna go way back about 40 years before them and pick something else.
Yeah, I might. So my wife and I are working our way through some older movies, some of which I've seen before and she hasn't, some of which neither of us have seen.
That is awesome. Well, when we're done with the podcast, I would love that list. I enjoy watching too many things, and it's so fun to see the stuff that has inspired the things that we're watching now. And you didn't know that it had a precursor, and those are fun to view. Now, let me use this as a jumping off point. So much of what we are doing today and so many things that we are seeing in missiology and around the world, they have precursors. There are things that came before them that impacted it greatly. How's that for a segue, Michael?
That's a great segue.
So what... I read your bio. You've been a part of the digs of 18 different sites. What are some of the things that you have been privy to seeing at some of those digs? And then we'll kind of get to what, those have led to or some of those discoveries.
Sure. So maybe some of the more interesting things that don't get published or published right away. Uh, so we sometimes excavate skeletons, human skeletal remains, and that's usually not talked about so much. Uh, Typically not until the final reports, actually, because it can cause problems, and it's difficult progress process and sensitive as well. But it's also very, very interesting to excavate burials. You have to do it extremely carefully, and it's quite a bit different than your typical excavation. You use some different materials, chemicals. The way that you remove the remains is going to be different than your average piece of pottery, of course. But some people really don't like to be involved in that at all. It just freaks them out. They don't even want to look at the skeleton. So it can create an interesting dynamic on excavations when some people want to be as far away from that as possible, and other people, that's all that they want to do. So it's fun to see the different personalities come out when you find something like that. Now, another thing that has a bit of that effect on people is something like a an altar, okay, something religious or cultic in nature. An altar where things were being sacrificed, not necessarily people. Usually it's just animals, but that's something else where people sort of think about the spiritual connections of what this thing was, what it was used for, and it can be a little bit eerie as well, but very, very interesting because excavating an altar is not very common as well. This is not necessarily something that's found at every site. Sure, they may have been present at just about every site, but to find them is quite rare. In fact, of all the sites that I have worked on, I've excavated one altar that was clearly an altar, and a survey at another site I found one. So it's not something you see every day or every season.
I imagine in the excavation of human remains, you're going to find not just human remains, but you're going to find all sorts of other items. Would we talk about those as realia or other things that they might carry with them into the afterlife? What are some of those things that you might find?
So one of the most typical things would be jewelry. This may be some kind of family heirloom that belonged to the person or to the family of the deceased, or maybe it was given to them or given to them for burial. They can take it into the afterlife. A recent excavation I was involved in where we found actually a double burial. A ring was found along with the deceased. So did they wear that ring during their life? Possibly, or maybe it was just placed in the burial there. The other thing you're going to find quite often is pottery. And it depends on the period and the culture, but that is also something that's often found in tombs or burials. So there are some grave goods in ancient times. Today, not really so common. Sometimes people will place some kind of keepsake into a coffin or a tomb, but in ancient times, yeah, you're almost always finding something.
Well, certainly not in the Western world, but still, even I can remember when we lived in Romania. It was frequent that people were buried with different artifacts from their life, and even families would purchase things on behalf of the dead person and maybe include them in their entombment and so on, so that they'd have a provision for the afterlife. But in the ancient world, this was a common practice, it seems like.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And if you look at some burial inscriptions, for the Romans, this was quite common for them to do, but we can go back earlier. Even the Shebna lintel from Jerusalem has something like this. They give warnings to anybody who would break into the tomb or their sarcophagus and steal things out of it. And then the Romans actually would impose fines for this. Whereas other people, they basically said, you're gonna be cursed. A curse will come upon you if you do this. So they were trying to deter grave robbers.
Now, did that work?
It doesn't seem to have been very effective at all, actually. No, because almost every tomb was robbed in ancient times. We talk about tomb robbing today or illegal looting, illegal archaeology, things like that. But this is a practice that goes all the way back into early civilization. Think about the Valley of the Kings. Pretty much everybody knows about that place where many of the Egyptian pharaohs are buried, especially the New Kingdom, and how big of a deal it was when they uncovered King Tut's tomb and it hadn't been robbed in antiquity. But basically every other tomb in that valley was robbed in ancient times. And what's left is usually the body and the sarcophagus, and some broken pieces of things. Rarely is anything of value left in the tomb.
So does that mean like the tombs, rather the bodies and things, like when you're talking about jewelry and things, like people didn't go to the grave with the bling on, like where it would actually be on hand or around the neck, but it was like in a bag next to it, which is why a grave robber wouldn't have to actually take the entire, all the wrapping off of the body to take the things off. Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
In an ancient Egyptian context, usually the jewelry wouldn't be underneath the mummy wrapping, but for other cultures that didn't mummify, they would wear it. They would wear a necklace, they would wear a ring, often things like that. Or sometimes it could just be placed on top of the body.
Wow.
Interesting. Well, then what about, sorry, Michael, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, so your specialty is in the Bronze Age. So third millennium, is that right? Is that how I always get these things wrong when we're going backwards?
The Bronze Age is a pretty big span of time, but yes, third millennium and second millennium, down to about 1200 BC. So that is the time I've spent the most time excavating, as well as the Roman period.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about the sites where you have excavated.
Sure. I guess we could start with maybe the most well-known site is Jerusalem.
I've heard
everybody
of that.
knows something about Jerusalem. So I did
and that's notoriously difficult, though,
excavations.
isn't it, as an archaeological site?
It is, because it's been continuously inhabited for 5,000 years. And so there are just structures upon structures and backfills and foundations over foundations. And of course, all the way up to either the present day or at least 20th and 19th century remains. Most likely the the Ottoman period, you're going to at least see that, if you aren't going to see something even later than that when you're digging. So definitely can be difficult and complicated to dig there, much more so than your average site. So you've got to be really careful as you're excavating to make sure that you aren't going through a layer, or you aren't going through a floor, or you aren't misdating something, because in ancient times they backfilled before laying a foundation with earlier material that they dug out of somewhere else nearby. And that was one of the sites I worked on in Jerusalem, Mount Zion. That's exactly what happened. So we spent a lot of time digging the Byzantine period there. But while we're digging the Byzantine period, we're actually digging through Roman material, first century material, because they had backfilled. And so we get down, and then we're actually digging later material underneath earlier material by the time we get to the floor.
Wow. Interesting. Now, I don't know if that is where you connect with the book that you wrote about excavating the evidence for Jesus. But if it does, that's great. If not, we'd still love to hear a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, that connects to the book for sure. There's content crossover, of course. Jesus was in Jerusalem, and working on that dig for 3 seasons was a great learning experience to become better acquainted with the Roman period and the early Christian period, the Byzantine period as well. But there were other sites that I worked on that were also first century time of Jesus. Bethlehem, the cave of John the Baptist area had some Roman period as well. Even a site called Khirbet Makatir in the West Bank that had a first century village or farmstead with a mansion. So quite a few different places. I haven't yet excavated first century in Galilee, although I did excavate at Hatzor in the Galilee area.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're doing these excavations, what is it that you're hoping to find that would, make you declare that this is some sort of evidence for Jesus?
Well, it really depends on the site, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
each site you're going to go in and you'll have some sort of hypothesis and some sort of expectations, but in archaeology, you also never really know what you're going to find. You may be very surprised, positively or negatively.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were excavating a site looking at the time of Jesus, say in Jerusalem, then I'll have certain expectations like, all right, we're going to, of course, find the pottery from this period. What kind of pottery did Jesus use? What did the oil lamps look like that he used? What did the cooking pots look like that he and the disciples used? What about the stoneware that was used in ritual washing? And
Mm-hmm.
you find a fair amount of that in sites where you have Jews observing the Mosaic law. Now, you can be digging a house or a site that's exactly the same time period and find none of that. It just depends on the beliefs
Mm-hmm.
of the people. But coins as well, coins of people that are mentioned in the Gospels, like Herod the Great, like Herod the Tetrarch or Antipas, Herod Philip. Tiberius, of course, is going to have his name on a lot of the coins. Pontius Pilate, the coins that he issued. So many of these people are going to be attested in the archaeological record by things that you're finding during the time of Jesus. Now, what we'd like to find are things that further establish the historicity of certain gospel narratives or clarify things, whether that's a building that was mentioned in the Gospels. For example, when they were excavating the pool of Siloam or the pool of
Mm-hmm.
Bethesda, they
Mm-hmm.
excavate some of the steps and sections of that pool, and those are buildings or architectural features that are specifically mentioned in the Gospels. Or at Capernaum, some ruins of the synagogue, the house of Peter, synagogues in other places, because synagogues are mentioned at many different cities and towns in the Gospels. And really only the last few decades has it been firmly established archaeologically that there were numerous synagogues in Judea and Galilee during the time of Jesus. So that would also always be a big, important, and interesting find.
Mm.
How does it feel if you're either on the site or around it shortly thereafter, or realizing that what has been established in history of, oh, this was the site that Jesus did such and such, or this is the pool, and then you're involved in the site where you dig it up and say, oh, no, 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 no. The thing that we've all thought for the last 100 or so years was the site, like the pool of Siloam, because I know that one, I preached John 9 a few years ago, And in my research, everybody said, oh, yeah, we all thought it was this, but it's actually this. This just got dug up. And now we see, man, that story comes to life even more because this is the actual site. Like, how does that feel being on a site with those like new discoveries?
It's incredible. It's a privilege. There's something about it where you feel like, all right, all the work that you put in, not just maybe at that site, but over the years in preparation, this is the kind of thing that makes it worthwhile and can really help people to better visualize and even understand the scriptures. So that for me it would be something like the reason that we do
Hmm.
archaeology is that type of thing.
Mm.
And I remember when that discovery was made, and it was it was something that was talked about in the past. There were a few scholars who had written on the idea that, all right, the pool of Siloam from the time of Jesus is probably over here, but they didn't know yet. And then
Right.
it gets discovered basically by accident, which that
Yeah.
happens quite a bit.
Wasn't that because of some plumbing work that the city was doing?
Yeah, it was work on the sewer system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
two big discoveries right around the same time, actually, because of construction related work. So Pool of Siloam working on the sewer, and then at the City of David Archaeological Park, they were redoing the visitor center, and that's when they exposed what many archaeologists and historians think is the Palace of David. So
Ooh.
kind of by accident. Well, once again, some scholars thought it could be located, or it probably is located underneath here, but nobody had found it. And then just again, construction work, and here's this huge building.
Wow.
That is so cool. I didn't mean to get us
Wow.
off track there. What are some of the things for you? There's the joy of seeing, hey, I read about this and oh my goodness, this is it. For you, how have you felt your faith has grown, been challenged, or encouraged because of the sites that you have seen and the things that you've dug up?
I would say the first thing is that it made the Bible come alive more and seem more real and tangible to me, rather than just reading it as a theological or spiritual guide where you see, okay, these are all principles, teachings, things we can live by, and these stories, they tell us something valuable, and yeah, they're real, but when you go there and you see the actual buildings and hold the artifacts and make a discovery of something connected to scripture, then it really seems like, yes, this is physical reality. It's
Hmm.
not just the words on the page, but
Hmm.
there's a more physical connection to it. And so that was something that was huge for me. It's not that I used to think that the events didn't happen or these people
Hmm.
didn't exist, but it just was not able to be visualized in my head in the
Mm.
same way. And then you get there, you do it. Okay, I know what this looks like. It was here, it was there, it was this close to this place. And oh, yes, this is how they wrote. These are the types of bowls that they used. And this is where they would bury their dead, and just things like that. So really kind of changed my perspective in a way.
Wow. Wow. Tell us what would be your list of the top 5 discoveries that really helped to illuminate your understanding of Scripture? We're putting you on the
Illuminating,
spot here.
yeah,
Dude, top
illuminating my
five list. You do that with
understanding.
film all the time, but now you have to do it with archaeology.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you 5 of my favorite discoveries. I don't
Okay.
know if they're all illuminating. Some are illuminating, some are confirming, things like that. But in the Old Testament, one of my favorites that I always mention is the Tel Dan Stele. So in 1993, this broken stone monument at the site of Dan is discovered out in front of the city gate in the courtyard area. And leading up to this, in the 80s and the early 90s, a lot of archaeologists, historians, and biblical scholars were coming to an agreement, a majority agreement, not everyone, but that David didn't exist, that he was a mythical character. There was no real King David. And this is because they said there's no archaeological evidence that's been found to support his existence. And they didn't consider, the Bible to be a historical source.
Right.
So this is found, though, and then there is this text that talks about a king of Israel and a king of Judah from the house of David, so the royal line of this house that David established. And all of a sudden, you have this evidence from the 9th century BC from one of the enemies of Israel that, yes, David existed. He was a king. He was the founder of the dynasty of Israelite kings. And things changed almost overnight. So that had a huge effect.
Yeah, neat. So there's number 5. Number 4, as we count down.
Number 4. Let's jump to the New Testament. This is another one of my favorites, and that is something called the Nazareth inscription, which is an edict of the emperor or Caesar inscribed on stone. And it talks about if anyone has broken into a stone sealed sepulcher tomb and stolen the body with wicked intent, as they say it, then they're going to impose the death penalty on that person or persons. And this was not excavated in controlled archaeological excavations, but it turned up in Nazareth. So if we can infer from that it was originally set up in Galilee, that gives us some context to it. And it's from the reign of Claudius, most likely. Okay. So the emperor who came just a few years after Jesus. And what a lot of people have seen with this inscription is it appears to be the Roman reaction to the story of the resurrection of Jesus, and specifically the idea that we see in Matthew 28 that supposedly the disciples stole the body of Jesus out of the tomb. And, now they're looking for it and they're trying to find the body so that they can show he's not resurrected. Somebody just stole the corpse. But it's very, very interesting because I think it indicates how that story was spread in Matthew 28 and continued to be for years. And they still didn't have an answer. And so the reaction is just, let's put a stop to this or anything like it, because Christianity is starting to have a big impact on the empire already, and we don't want that to continue.
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. Number 3.
Number 3. All right. Let's jump back to the Old Testament, and I guess we've done a couple of artifacts, so maybe let's do a site. So one of my favorite sites, which I hope to work on someday, is Jericho. And Jericho has been a somewhat controversial site within archaeology, especially archaeology as it relates to the Bible. But I think there's a great deal of evidence that's been found there that connects to the Joshua narrative and the book of Judges, and then even Kings later on when it's rebuilt. So at Jericho, you had this excavation in the 30s by John Garstang, and it wasn't the first excavation there, but it was really the first when the pottery chronology was established and archaeology was a bit more refined, so people could really say this layer dates to this time period and so forth. The previous Austro-German excavations, they found a lot of interesting things, but they didn't quite know how to date them or divide them out. So Garstan gets there, he excavates, he finds this massive destruction of the city that's burned, looks like it was attacked, and he finds all this pottery and some scarabs, even actually a cuneiform tablet. And based on his finding, he dates that to about 1400 BC, and he says this seems like it's the destruction of Jericho by Joshua. And he, by the way, was not a Christian. He was not a Jew. He was an agnostic, but he didn't really have a problem with the Bible being historically accurate, or having at least historically accurate sections. So he goes on to some other sites later. And in the 50s, Kathleen Kenyon, another British archaeologist, goes there, and she, along with Peter Parr, they excavate these big trenches. So they dig down really deep and find, the Neolithic Tower of Jericho that's very famous. And yet Kenyon concludes that Jericho did not exist at the time of Joshua, and that it had been destroyed in 1550 BC, or maybe a little bit later than that, but it was abandoned for a long period of time. And so she says, this biblical narrative didn't happen. But something really interesting that she did find is that her excavations showed how the mud brick city wall had collapsed almost all around the city, and it had fallen in front of the stone retaining wall. And if you look at the cross section of the drawings, or even if you go there today, it's sometimes difficult to see, but with fresh excavations, it's sort of a ramp almost that you can walk up, or you could walk up these fallen bricks over the retaining wall to the mound and getting into the city. So after that massive fire destruction by this invading army, all the grain that was stored around the city was just left in these big jars. It was not looted. So she found some things really interesting connected to the manner in which the city was destroyed according to the Bible.
Yeah.
But she had this different date, so that was a problem. Well, I think now her excavation reports came out in the 80s, and there have been more excavations since then, and there have been some reevaluations. I think now there's a compelling case. I shouldn't say it's fairly well established,
right?
So many people they want to discount the biblical narrative, but I think there's a very compelling case archaeologically that it was destroyed around 1400 BC in connection with the Joshua-led conquest. And so that, I think, is just an incredible site. Really intriguing how we have these different components of the biblical narrative that match up to what we see in the archaeological record. And that's something I like to talk and teach about. And I published an article, about a year and a half ago on this. So I enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, the Bible really does act almost as a roadmap, it seems, to a lot of archaeology of that area.
I recently had a question, actually, in a lecture I was giving, and somebody said something along the lines of, does having the Bible give you sort of a superpower as an archaeologist? And I think what he was getting at was, we have so much historical information in the Bible about specific locations and people as well, and events, that if we read that, if we know that, if we use it as a historical guide, then we can interpret or have expectations for, or understand what might be found archaeologically.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just throw that out completely, then you're just dependent on forming your own
Mm-hmm.
hypothesis about, a few potsherds here and the foundations of a building. There may be an inscription if you're very fortunate. And so I do think it is an incredible source just from a historical archaeological
Mm-hmm.
perspective. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's a lot more to it than that.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Okay. So we're on number two. What is number two?
Number two. Okay. Let's go to the New Testament again. Uh, One of my favorite New Testament characters is Sergius Paulus. So he was the Roman governor of Cyprus, partially during the time of Paul. Obviously, was not the governor the entire time. Paul was a missionary. But first missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas go to Cyprus. They land at Salamis on the eastern coast, which has incredible ruins that have been preserved, including that port. And then they go all the way to the other side of the island to Paphos, which was the capital at the time, and they meet Sergius Paulus. Well, what are some things we know about this particular politician? At Cyprus, north of Paphos, they found an official Roman inscription that talks about the proconsul Paulus. So this is proconsul was the title he had for governor during the reign of Claudius, and some of the information embedded in there also seems to suggest that this was in the 40s, before some changes were made in the Roman government. You go to Rome, and there's an inscription about one of the curators of the Tiber River, the main river in Rome, and his name is Sergius Paulus, and this is about the late 40s. So you get Roman politicians, they would move around the empire. They wouldn't just stay for years and years and years as a governor. And then you go over to Asia Minor, and you look outside the town of Pisidian Antioch, and there was an estate there by a powerful family, and there was an inscription that's now in the museum that mentions a certain L. Sergius Paulus, a Latin inscription, which some people think it was his son, others think it may have been him specifically, but we have all these inscriptions, as well as actually as some ancient Roman manuscript sources, but talking about this governor that Paul met, one when he is in that position, and then others after, maybe the one in Asia Minor before that. And here's this fairly minor character in the Acts narrative, but we've got this great evidence from Roman inscriptions for his existence and role.
Wow.
That's cool.
That's cool. That is cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. Those things are always kind of fun. It's faith affirming, isn't it? I mean, that you see, like you've mentioned before, that these just weren't names written in a book, but they were real people. They lived, they had roles and responsibilities and so on. It does kind of bring to life the scripture. All right, Andrew, drum roll.
I can do this.
Number one.
We can do this. Here we are. Titus, what is number one?
Okay, the last one. For the last one, I'm going to go back to the Old Testament, to a prophet that wrote many things foretelling Jesus and his coming, the coming Messiah, and that would be Isaiah.
Okay.
So only a few years ago, during excavations in Jerusalem, so this was not something found on the antiquities market, and that is really important because this type of artifact, it's called a bulla, it's a seal impression. Most of those that are in museums or collections were found on the antiquities market, but this was found in controlled excavations in Jerusalem. So they're digging there, they're digging in the royal quarter of Jerusalem, we could call it, and they come across a couple of these seal impressions. One is a seal impression of King Hezekiah, which
Oh,
that alone was quite important because the others that we had were from the antiquities market. So this really confirmed the authenticity of the others and is something without a shadow of a doubt. This was stamped by Hezekiah's ring.
Wow.
But that also helps to give us a very precise date for the archaeological layer and the material around that. One of the other seal impressions there was a seal of Isaiah the prophet. And this made a lot of headlines when it was announced. Some people pushed back against it because
it
as
just seemed
things go,
too nice.
yeah, with biblical discoveries, there's always a lot of pushback. But it seemed quite obvious there. It's the name Isaiah, it's the title prophet with one letter broken, and it's right in the context of King Hezekiah, who Isaiah was closely associated with. And so this was our first archaeological evidence of Isaiah from the time of Isaiah. And you pair that then with the great Isaiah scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all those incredible, not just history, but prophecy that's in it. And you have this amazing case for the reality of Isaiah the prophet and the things that he wrote.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Dang.
That is cool. That
Okay,
is cool.
so I have a question for you, Michael. Think of your follow-up or other thoughts, but what would be what is something that is in the realm of possibility for you, Titus, and what you have observed that you would love to pursue being on a site hoping to find? So dream scenario, what do you think is actually a realistic thing that you would love to pursue and hopefully find on an archaeological dig?
Okay, well, maybe an easy answer for that is if I'm working in the Roman period, first century site, that I would love to find an inscription that mentions Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus from the time of Jesus. Now, I would argue we actually have a couple as well as numerous historical sources of the first and second century, but still that would be something incredible. And I do think in the realm of possibility. Now he was well known later in the first century, so I think you could find something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that would be cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you in relationship to that. I mean, there's been all of this news recently about the Megiddo mosaic that's now at the Museum of the Bible, I think, here in the United States. What are some of your thoughts about that mosaic and its mentioning of Jesus as God?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and from a early church and early Christianity perspective, very important. Of course, this is not a first century mention of Jesus. It's also not the earliest meeting place for Christians that's been discovered, but it is quite early, and it does establish that people believe Jesus was God early in the Christian period. And it's something really visual that looks good that people who are maybe not digging archaeological sites all the time can connect with really well. And I'm glad it's brought a lot of attention to archaeology and early Christianity.
Yeah, and
What time period? How old? What are we talking
Third
about?
century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's in the form of a nomen sacrum, isn't it? Is that what I remember?
Yes. Nomina sacra, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Good. All
That
right.
is
Well,
cool.
amazing.
So,
Yeah.
Titus,
Well, Titus, this has been great.
Yeah.
To have you on. And before we end, and Andrew's going to march us out here in a moment, tell us about the books that you've written. I know that you've done at least 3 on archaeology. So tell us a little bit about those, and we want to encourage people to look for those.
Sure. So yes, I've got 3 that were recently published on biblical archaeology, and I've got another one coming out hopefully in the not too distant future. So one of them is on artifacts connected to the Bible, so objects, ancient objects, and I go through over 100 objects
Wow.
from Genesis to Revelation. So I try to spread it out through biblical history, do it in chronological order. And some of them are really important for establishing historical reliability of the scriptures. Others are things that illuminate the scriptures, or they help us to understand something. For example, the Tel Dan Stele we talked about, that's one of them in there, establishing David as a king and founder of the royal house. But something that just illuminates scripture, helps us to understand it better, would be the pim weight that was found at Gezer. And it's 1 Samuel 13:21. People didn't know how to translate a particular word because it went out of use. But when this object was discovered, they understood, oh, this is a weight, and it was 2/3 of a shekel. So a lot of stuff like that in the book.
Yeah. Neat.
Then I have one on the archaeology of Jesus and the Gospels. And so, of course, that's a lot more detailed to a very specific time period. But I go through the life of Jesus from before his birth to the resurrection, and look at all the different archaeological sites and artifacts, as well as some ancient manuscripts that are connected to the Gospels. And then I've got a book on locations throughout the biblical world. Did about 70 different sites. So some of them are in Mesopotamia, some are in Egypt, some are in Greece, as well as, of course, Israel and the Holy Land. And I tried, though, to, again, spread it out a little bit, because I wanted people to get some information about the lesser discussed geographic regions of the Bible, like Mesopotamia and Egypt, or even Greece, where, we usually don't talk about those as much, or people don't go on tours to those places hardly ever. And I wanted people to see there's a lot that's been found at these archaeological sites. So that one is probably a bit harder to read for the average person, because I go into a lot more detail. And, I think the section on Jerusalem is like 40 pages or so. But, I think the other two are very accessible. And then the next book I'm coming out with is on people in the Bible, or biblical characters. So I go through a bit on every person who's named in the Bible who has been attested by some archaeological discovery, showing that all these people, they're real. They got the correct titles, time periods, locations. It's not just a book of geography or stories, but it is historical reality.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Cool. We'll look forward to that book.
Yeah. So, Dr. Kennedy, if people are excited, where are they finding these books, and how can they keep up with the work that you are continuing to do?
Well, if you use Amazon, that's probably the easiest place to find the books. But other online booksellers have them. If you go to Barnes and Noble, they may have it on their shelf as well, or some Christian bookstores. So you've got a lot of different options for that.
That is fantastic. Well, Titus, thank you so much for being on with us. It was an honor to have you. Thank you for letting us grill you with whatever popped into our minds at that moment. But also, listeners, we want to thank you for joining us as well. If some of the things that you've heard on this podcast interest you, we would encourage you to go check out our back catalog, not just the other podcasts in the Archaeology Meets Missiology series, but on Ephesiology as a whole. And then with Ephesiology, we have Ephesiology master classes. We would encourage you, go online, look into it, masterclasses.ephesiology.com. See what we have to offer, and maybe some of this academic, scholastic preparation for what God might be doing in and through you is of interest to you, go. I promise it will be an encouragement. So for Michael, for Titus, and myself, thank you for doing theology and community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.